While millions of people are screaming at televisions, painting their faces in team colors, and emotionally collapsing because a group of strangers lost a game, there's a surprisingly large group of people sitting quietly in the background thinking something they rarely say out loud. I genuinely do not understand why everyone cares this much. And according to psychology, that reaction might reveal something extremely specific about the way your brain processes identity, meaning, emotion, and belonging. Because despite what sports culture sometimes implies, not caring about sports does not make you boring. It doesn't mean you lack passion. It doesn't mean you're antisocial. And it definitely doesn't mean something is wrong with you. In fact, people who don't obsess over sports often experience the world in a psychologically different way than people who do. And once you understand why, you stop seeing sports obsession as normal and non-interest as strange. You start realizing there's simply two different ways of navigating human emotion. Let's start with the obvious question. Why do people care so much about sports in the first place? Not casually enjoy. Not occasionally watch. Care. Deeply. Emotionally. The kind of caring where someone's entire mood changes because a team lost. The kind where strangers hug each other in bars after a touchdown. The kind where a grown adult can remember a championship from 17 years ago more clearly than what they ate yesterday. At first glance, it seems irrational. But psychologically, it makes perfect sense. Human beings are tribal creatures. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a group. Your tribe protected you, fed you, kept you alive. Being accepted meant survival. Being excluded meant danger. And even though modern life looks different now, the human brain still carries those ancient instincts. Sports became one of the safest modern versions of tribal identity. Your team becomes your group. Your colors become your symbols. Your rivals become the enemy. And the brain reacts to all of it emotionally, even when logically it knows none of it truly affects survival. That's why sports fans often say, "We won," instead of, "They won." Because psychologically, the brain partially merges personal identity with the team itself. Researchers actually call this basking in reflected glory. When the team succeeds, the fan unconsciously feels successful too. Which sounds strange until you realize humans do this constantly. People attach identity to politics, music, fandoms, brands, online communities, even celebrities. Sports just happen to be one of the most socially accepted versions of it. But here's where things get interesting. People who don't obsess over sports often have weaker tribal attachment systems. Not weaker emotionally, just weaker in terms of identity fusion. Their brains are less likely to emotionally merge with large groups. Which means they often look at sports from the outside instead of emotionally stepping into it. To them, the emotional intensity can feel confusing, even surreal, especially when they see people screaming at televisions, arguing online for hours, or feeling emotionally devastated over outcomes they had absolutely no control over. And this disconnect creates a strange social divide. Because sports fans often cannot understand indifference. And non-sports people often cannot understand obsession. Each side quietly thinks the other is missing something obvious. But psychologically, both groups are simply finding meaning in different places. And this difference becomes even more fascinating when dopamine enters the picture. Because sports are basically designed to stimulate anticipation. Every play, every close score, every comeback, every last-second shot. The uncertainty is the entire point. And uncertainty is incredibly powerful for the brain's reward system. In psychology, intermittent rewards are considered one of the most addictive reinforcement patterns that exist. It's the same principle behind gambling. Slot machines work because the brain never fully knows when the reward is coming. Sports create a similar loop. The unpredictability keeps dopamine active. Your brain stays emotionally engaged because the outcome remains uncertain until the very end. And for some people, that emotional roller coaster feels thrilling. For others, it feels exhausting. People who don't care about sports often don't receive strong dopamine stimulation from spectator competition. Their brains simply don't interpret it as emotionally rewarding enough to sustain attention. Which is why many non-sports people experience games the exact same way sports fans experience things they personally don't care about. Neutral. Emotionally flat. Almost impossible to emotionally invest in. And honestly, this is where many misunderstandings begin. Because sports fans often assume non-fans are emotionless. But that usually isn't true at all. Those same people might become deeply emotional over music, art, books, films, ideas, personal relationships, creative projects. Psychology researchers sometimes refer to this as empathy allocation. Human beings only have so much emotional energy. People simply distribute it differently. One person emotionally invests in championship games. Another invests in storytelling. Another in philosophy. Another in nature. Another in deeply personal relationships. The emotional depth still exists. It's just pointed somewhere else. And there's another uncomfortable layer most people don't talk about. For some people, indifference toward sports actually has a social backstory. Maybe they were excluded growing up. Maybe they hated competitive environments. Maybe sports culture made them feel invisible. Maybe they associated athletic spaces with judgment, aggression, humiliation, or social pressure. And over time, the brain quietly disconnected emotionally from that entire world. Not because they consciously decided to, but because the mind protects itself from environments where it once felt small. And sometimes, it's much simpler than that. Some people just genuinely find sports boring. That's it. No trauma. No deep explanation. Just boredom. Which sounds almost illegal to admit in certain cultures. Because sports obsession is treated so universally normal that disinterest sometimes gets interpreted as a personality flaw. But psychologically, it isn't. It's simply difference. And honestly, people who don't obsess over sports often experience identity in a more internally driven way. Their self-worth is less dependent on group victories, less emotionally attached to external competition, less tied to symbolic wins. They're often more focused on personal meaning than collective emotional highs. And that can create a very different relationship with life itself. Because while one person experiences emotional intensity through watching competition, another experiences it through creating something, learning something, understanding something, feeling deeply connected to a real moment in their own life instead of someone else's performance. Neither approach is objectively superior, but they are psychologically different. And maybe the strangest part of all this is how invisible the non-sports mindset often feels socially. Sports culture is everywhere. Conversations at work, social media, advertisements, family gatherings. Entire cities emotionally unite around teams. And if you're someone who simply doesn't care, you quietly learn to pretend sometimes. You nod. You smile. You ask who won. Even though internally you feel completely disconnected from the emotional importance everyone else seems to naturally understand. And after a while, some people begin wondering if they're missing some fundamental human experience. But they're not. They're just emotionally stimulated by different things. That's all. Because underneath sports obsession is really something much bigger. The human need for meaning, for belonging, for emotional release, for identity, for narrative. Sports simply package all of those things together in an extremely effective way. But they are not the only place those needs can be fulfilled. Some people find meaning in books, some in music, some in science, some in relationships, some in building quiet lives that feel emotionally real to them instead of emotionally loud to everyone else. And maybe that's the real difference. Sports fans often experience emotion collectively. People who don't obsess over sports often experience emotion more privately, more internally, more quietly. And in a world constantly demanding visible passion, quiet emotional depth can sometimes look like indifference from the outside. But it isn't indifference. It's simply a different emotional language. So the next time someone looks shocked because you genuinely could not care less about the game everyone's talking about, remember this. You are not broken. You are not emotionless. You are not boring. Your brain simply seeks meaning, excitement, identity, and emotional fulfillment in different places than the crowd. And honestly, that difference might explain far more about your personality than your interest in sports ever could.